A home is not just four walls and a roof, it is safety. But for too many Europeans today, home has become a source of anxiety.
Affordable housing and rental stress is a global crisis. Global cities have implemented various short and long-term strategies that have had limited success. The European Union is tackling the subject head-on with the European Affordable Housing Plan, which is currently in draft. We see an appetite for change, especially from young voters. In New York City, Zoran Mamdani was elected on a platform of rent freezes and investment in subsidised housing after decades of neglect. In this presentation on affordable housing, we will look at the current state of affairs in Australia, including the initiatives of advocacy groups and stakeholder analysis. A community survey in Sydney's inner west will be presented with proposed actions. Collaborative governance with all sections of government will be at the core of an advocacy plan to alleviate the housing affordability and rental stress of our young Australians and future generations. Alan Kohler, economist and ABC journalist, has been vocal on the crisis in Australia. He identifies the medium multiple, that is, the ratio of accommodation payments to income. This is treated as an affordability parameter. Australia, by international standards and the Reserve Bank research, had the ratio of 9.7 in 2024. Anything above 9 is considered unaffordable. Sydney has now climbed above Hong Kong as the most expensive city in the world at 14.7, which is still climbing. Kohler's summation of the problem is that the National Housing Accord to build 1.2 million homes in 5 years is not achieving its target numbers, so are falling short by some 70,000 homes in the first year. Therefore, not enough supply. Reserve Bank interest rates have increased, which also increases demand. The federal government's 5% deposit scheme also leads to more expensive housing. Immigration has been increasing, and student permanent residency has also increased, but there isn't enough supply. And there aren't enough skilled workers for construction. So we need a sustained, long-term focus on supply, construction, productivity, and skilled workforce, possibly skilled migration. There are a number of active advocacy groups in Australia involved in the housing crisis debate. National Shelter and ACOS are two of those advocacy groups. And in this table, we represent the platforms and the policies that they stand for, the summary of which will be on the next slide. So both National Shelter and ACOS call for a National Affordable Housing Authority. They call for the abolition of negative gearing and tax reform, particularly in the area of capital gains tax. They also call for federal government's direct investment in homes. Housing affordability is a complex area with many stakeholders, including advocacy groups, the three levels of government, buyers, sellers, builders, and community groups. The urgency rating that's mentioned here for each group is represented as extreme, high, and medium. Each of these stakeholders have their own needs that are stated in the graph. Both advocacy groups and Amnesty International demand that homes should be for living and not wealth creation. At the next level of consideration, the issues for these stakeholders reflect the complexity of vested interests of each party and the overriding demand for more supply of properties and dwellings. Through analysis of each stakeholder issue, we're able to identify multiple problem statements which need to be addressed. The framework of my advocacy plan is based on the problem statement at the top right for the advocacy groups. That is, how can Australia achieve a national housing strategy through stronger collaborative intergovernmental coordination and action? So yes, it is definitely a complex and convoluted problem that we face with our housing affordability crisis. The advocacy plan then must address how to implement multiple proposed actions to address the stakeholders' problem statements, as shown here. To further understand the issues felt by my community of Inner West Sydney, I conducted a community survey in October 2025. The objective of this was to conduct a point-in-time survey, so in October, of residents in Inner West Sydney to compare the views of each generation on specific questions on how to alleviate the housing crisis affecting our community. The Inner West Community Survey covered 20 community groups that were accessed through Facebook. The membership of these groups exceeded 250,000 people. It achieved 189 survey participants, 60 of whom own their own home. As just mentioned, the demographics showed that many in the survey own their own home or apartment, but all expressed an interest in their community with an appetite to contribute to the survey questions and to come up with comments to an open question on housing affordability. On the question of increasing supply in the Inner West to alleviate the housing crisis, we asked, should we allow a dramatic increase in supply of properties in the Inner West? Should we allow the building of more dwellings in the area close to you? Should we build high density, low to mid-rise dwellings in the Inner West? Should we provide 20% of new dwellings as affordable? That means less than 30% of income as the rental cost for essential workers. And should we locate the new housing at transport hubs? With strong agreement that 20% of new homes should be affordable for essential workers, and most should be located near transport hubs, we learnt, when broken down by generation, that we see that millennials born from 1981 to 96, that means 29 to 44-year-olds at the moment, are most agreeable. These findings, when broken down by generation, one can see that the average score from the previous table is exceeded when one looks at millennials in particular. In the blue, Gen Z also looks like it is higher than the average score. However, it's very hard to make a conclusion, to draw a conclusion from Gen Z because the numbers were so low and didn't really achieve any significant ability to conclude. Most interesting and of great concern was the rental mortgage stress by generation. As you can see, with millennials and Gen X, and also to some extent the boomers, they're spending more than 30% of income on their rental accommodation or their mortgage. With the Gen Z group, we see here that the numbers are too small to draw any conclusions. Those greater than 50% are most concerning. The rental and mortgage stress can be seen clearer here. From 173 who responded, 60, that's 35%, own their own home. 24 or 14% rent affordably. That is, paying less than 30% of their household income in rental or mortgage repayments. 89, that's 79%, are in rental stress, paying more than 30% of household income. 16, or 9%, are paying greater than 50% of their income on rent. Again, Gen Z cohort was too small and we can't draw any conclusions there. So as mentioned, Gen Z were poorly represented in the survey. And so in the next couple of slides, I'll show you where further information from our youth was sourced from two United Nations reports from the Australian UN Youth Representative, in which 5,000 interviews were taken with Australian youth. As also part of the plan, we'll look at further stakeholder analysis from youth groups. So the youth representative to the UN report from 2024, which interviewed 5,000 of Australia's youth, identified in the area of poverty and financial security that housing affordability, cost of living, affordable energy and healthcare were some of their main concerns. Now these cover the Sustainable Development Group 1, 7 and 11 in the UN Sustainability Development Goals. Now, these issues of poverty and financial security are linked through then to mental health and well-being because they cause economic stress, rental stress, concern for the future, and lead to poor mental health. And this covers Sustainability Development Goal 3. Taking it to the next level, where decent work and economic growth are questioned, and sustainable cities and communities may be impacted as our generations move through growing and participating in community, we see an impact on SDG 8 and also again on SDG 11. So the core to the advocacy strategy is to establish a national affordable housing authority. A collaborative governance framework needs to be established to tackle the affordable housing crisis, with a focus on supply, affordable and accessible properties and rentals for our Gen Z and future generations. And all of this needs to be under the control of a national affordable housing authority. With collaborative governance as the foundation of the framework, we need to enhance governance efforts of all stakeholders and advocacy groups and promote close intergovernmental cooperation. I'm aware that this is a very detailed table, but no apologies, because it represents the amount of effort taken in interviewing government stakeholders, which led to valuable insights and outcomes, which are highlighted as actions in the next slide. What happened was I approached and met with the office manager of the Grayndler Federal Electorate, met with the Minister for Balmain as a state electorate, and although not yet meeting the mayor of the Inner West Council, had discussions with individuals from that council. Also spoke to the financial regulator from APRA and the ex-staffer who was responsible in New South Wales Labor and federal Labor policies. So the key actions that came from those discussions were one of advocacy, to write to the current Treasurer, considering productivity, affordable youth loans, National Affordable Housing Authority, skilled immigration, and how Section 96 of the Constitution could form a carrot and stick approach by the federal government over the states, territories, and local government. Also, exerting pressure in New South Wales to implement and enforce policies for the community. Gaining support, building a coalition of parliamentary advocates for affordable housing. Those that have policies or have a desire to act and do something about affordable housing for Australia's youth. And in a political sense, to put pressure on members of parliament to lobby through local constituencies, using NIMBYs and YIMBYs and also advocacy groups to enhance that pressure so that it is being fed through the political system. And financially, to encourage incentives for an increase in supply. And last but not least, persevere, so knock again at the doors of the Inner West Council's mayor. So, as a collaborative governance advocacy plan, the objective is to action the collaborative governance initiatives and prepare media releases for ABC News with the aim to influence a Four Corners type investigation on solutions to resolve the housing and rental crisis. So in conclusion, a big stick and carrot approach is required from a national affordable housing authority. To achieve this, a coalition of parliamentary advocates is required, and advocacy across constituencies to create a dynamic approach and single voice to get attention from elected members is required. Thank you.